Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Be the Vessel podcast. My name is Daniel, and today I'm going to speak to thinking. I've written a lot about, thought a lot about, and experienced a lot of thinking throughout my life, as I have no doubt you have as well. And for many years, my thinking was quite sick, is how I would describe it. As most of our thinking is, it's distorted. It's based in um, the primitive wiring of our nervous system, uh, of our brain, the conditioned beliefs based on survival mechanisms and animalistic tendencies in the body, all of which contribute in a lot of ways to stress, not to happiness, not to the easing or the healing of suffering, but to hypervigilance, um, to solving illusory problems, made up problems, because our experience of the world is based on the projection of the conditioned beliefs and thinking. And so as I started to heal, and I started to heal not just through traditional means of talk therapy, even though I was trained that way, but through accessing the body and other forms of accessing the emotional body, um, and accessing the thinking. Because for many years, I attempted to access my thinking with thinking, as many of you may do as well. Except when the issue lies in the thinking, you cannot solve the problem with itself. So for a little while, I started to write in a way and speak in a way that was actually very disavowing of thinking. It was, essentially cut off thinking. Cut off thinking. It's not useful to you. It doesn't have your best interests in mind, which is an interesting phrase. And sometimes people say they don't have your best interests at heart. It's an interesting reference points, mind and heart. Well, the thinking doesn't have your best interests in thinking. Why don't we just say it that way? It's based on ideas that do not support freedom of expression, authentic love and joy, because those simply live in different parts of your experience. Though with practice and in my own work, in my own reading, I came back to thinking. Now, it's clear to me that the healing journey is not about cutting out or sort of exercising, not like fitness, but like the exorcist kind of thing, exercising parts of us. It's not about, I mean, you can't anyway. We're in this mind body experience with ego. And if you reach an ultimate point of being able to allow the ego to die, that's beautiful. Though many of us are not there and will not get there in this lifetime, and that's okay. That may not be meant for us. From where I'm at and the service that I can provide, we're still dancing with ego, and we're dancing with thinking. One point of potential confusion, of which was coming to me just now, was that listening to a different source is a phrase I use, cultivating intuition, intuitive wisdom, listening to a different source, and sort of letting go or practicing a bit of distance from the sickness and thinking. It doesn't mean we're not using our mind. There's a lot of in more traditional realms of clinical psychology and healing modalities like that, there's a lot of emphasis on body work because many are coming to a similar conclusion that we we're not really able to access all of the trauma, all of the things that need to be healed just through conscious thinking, um, or through the traditional ways of conversation that involve thinking minds, thinking brain. And so there's a development of an emergence, a burgeoning space of more body-based modalities, letting the body speak, because the body keeps the score, as references, Bessel van der Kolk's work and many others who train in these modalities. Though it's not really mind versus body. They're not mutually exclusive. We might think of mind as all encompassing thinking and body. And that the body is actually just a vessel for the mind, a different part of the mind, a less conscious part of the mind, a part of the mind that holds more of the childlike conditioning, parts of yourself that you're not able or ready or willing to see. And then the body holds other, elements of the feeling consciousness, the emotions. Because emotions don't take place in thinking. Thought can be an aspect of an emotional experience, but really it's the conditioned belief that's showing up in the thinking. Anyway, so if we're going to practice loosening the attachment to thinking, what does that actually look like? One helpful tool or tip might be, well, firstly, as many teachers refer to, you are not the thinking. I mean, that is the basic foundation of all of this, is that the thinking does not represent you. And you can see this because rarely does it have your best interest at heart. I said heart that time, which is poignant because the heart always does. The heart is pure, the heart space, the energetic heart space, not just the physical thing beating in your chest. The energetic heart space is pure. And if you ever sort of bring your awareness down to that space, you will find that's where more joy lives. Sometimes it's guarded over with fear and trauma, but underneath that is joy and gratitude, a pure, authentic self. But the thinking is not really that way. Thinking is often wrapped up in comparison and expectations and being good enough and anxieties about what others are going to think and have I done enough today and all that stuff, all these conditioned fear-based, brain-based mechanisms of survival. So first is seeing that that's not really who you are. I'm not saying the heart space is necessarily exactly who you are either, but it's a more adaptive place to visit. Let's put it that way. It's a more adaptive place to visit to get closer to a true essence and to a more adaptive and happier and aligned essence. But this isn't disregarding like what is mind? It's not just brain. Let's think of mind as more awareness. And when you get into these kinds of discussions, the language can be so confusing because what is that? Does mind produce awareness? Does awareness produce mind? Well, it's all produced, let's say, by the life source energy within you. The life source energy, we can call it consciousness, you can call it God. That's what fuels all of this. That's what beats your heart. That's what makes things flow throughout the body. That's what produces thought. It's all produced by the life source energy. We can say that the body runs, we might use the word automatically, but why? Why does the heart Why is it doing all that it does? Well, there's some intelligent design, right? That's fueling it. So the source, let's just call it this light source energy. I like the word light. So that's fueling all, and that itself produces an awareness. You're aware. You're aware that you exist. At least I am. I can't prove that you are, but I gather that you are. We might call it self-awareness, awareness of self, awareness of existence. And so that awareness, let's just call it mind, it can be focused on the thinking. And for so many of us, it's the same thing. It's like, what do you mean? Mind is thinking. There's no, what? My awareness means thinking. Because maybe you've never even experienced gaps in the thinking. And you've been allowing this computer program to run for so long that you don't know there's anything else. So first, there is a very crucial practice in seeing that when the thinking stops, you still exist and you actually still have awareness, and you can actually still act with intention. You might call it being in a flow state, or a various different terminology, being in action, different states of meditation. And so with this awareness, when you recognize that the thinking is not serving you, you can bring the awareness to the body or to the breath. And when you do that, when you bring attention to other parts of your experience, immediately something happens. If you're not breathing, really, if there's tightness in your chest and you're panicked and you're stressed, when you could say when you think about breathing, see, language is important, but it's not really that you could have a thought, but you could also just direct your awareness to breath. And then you might automatically start to breathe, or automatically start to drop the shoulders. You don't require thinking in that process. It's kind of like, people have different ways of reading. And, most people, at least I have done this for as long as I can remember, when you read, you're reading it in your head, right? Like the voice in your head produces the words. Jane went to the store, and some people maybe read it out loud, but typically you're hearing it in your own voice, right? Have you ever thought about the fact that that's not necessary? I have experimented with it. It's actually quite difficult to unhook the thinking or your own voice from the narrative, to just let the information absorb into you. It almost feels like it's not possible. It is. I've experienced it. It's still, I haven't mastered that, but it's clearly possible. It happens at times. It happens where you might go through a passage in a book and you realized, oh, I wasn't thinking that. I wasn't narrating it with thought, with a voice, with inner voice. So it's kind of like that. When you recognize that you require a breath, or really it's a different conversation to say when something recognizes that you need a breath, because is that you? A lot of this, it seems to be happening automatically. If you really felt in charge of everything going on rather than the life source energy, there would be a lot on your plate. Regardless, when you notice that there is discomfort and you come back to the breath, there can be a thought that says, you need breath. But it's not required. And in many instances in life, we have grown so attached to the need to narrate things in here. Oh, it's raining. Oh, this person just cut me off. Oh, and to react through thinking. But it's actually not required. And just like reading, it can feel very unnatural and uncomfortable to begin to unhook from it. But as you practice, what happens is you become more connected to the truer essence of who you are, the awareness itself. And from that place of awareness, you don't actually need to react to anything. Things go on in your circumstance, and you can take action. That's not what I mean by reaction. The body takes action all the time. You breathe. When you've been sitting for a long time, you might get up. Who makes those decisions? You might think, well, I do. I make those decisions. The awareness, it may arise from, I don't know, somewhere into awareness, and you become conscious of it. And then you may go right into thinking, and it may happen so instantaneously that you think you're doing it. But things arise from a source. Where? I don't know. I don't know where. They just arise within us. And then all of a sudden we're present of it. We're presenced to the fact that we've been sitting for a long time and we feel like getting up and going for a walk. That source is not thinking. That's not thinking. Thinking is the result of whatever happens there. It's the sensation is brought to awareness, and then the thought comes in and says, I should go for a walk. But that I should go for a walk, that's not a necessary part of the process. And so as you begin to unhook, it's not to say that we won't use thinking at all. Thinking can be valuable in certain instances with intention, but not out of reactivity. And it becomes like, I heard this example recently, the difference between a gas car and an electric car. In an electric car, things happen instantaneously. It's electricity. Versus a gas car needing to go through all these individual mechanical parts. It's like that. You can live more like the electric car, where things just flow. And that, with practice, that leads to more knowing, more intuitive knowing, because thinking cannot know. What I mean by that is you can think things, but you don't know if they're true or not. You can think things about yourself, others, in the world for many, many years, and then you learn one new piece of information and it's different. Your thought has changed, or you have excessive doubt and fear, which many of us do. It's wired into the brain, and so the thinking is filled with doubt and fear. So thinking is never sure of itself. It's always a game of comparison. And is this really the right choice? And did I do this right? Did I say the right thing? Thinking lacks conviction, which is why thinking at its best is used to support other aspects of mind. Thinking can be used to support, or I can say other aspects of consciousness. Thinking can be used to support the heart space. So we can be led by the heart, a more authentic revelation of who we are, at least in the physical form, and who we want to be. Joyful, free, authentic, passionate, loving, grateful. We can use thinking to support that. And it takes some unlearning, because the thinking might be so wired to self-punishment, berating you, because it's been conditioned to survive in that way. Many of us have very, very self-punishing and negative thoughts. And I did for many, many years, until you start to recognize that you don't have to be victim to the thinking. It can be very painful at points. And so I don't mean to minimize how powerful thinking can be and how powerful the ego's identification with it can be and its hold over you. But with practice, you can loosen it, and you can start to talk back to the thinking and say, no, we're not doing that anymore. Oh, thinking just had a reaction. Well, I'm not going to listen to it. And it's not that you have to have complete control or mastery of everything. The idea of control is an ego-based thing. True presence is more about surrender. So the thinking can go on and it can say negative things about you sometimes, but you are choosing to recognize that you are not that. And the thinking can respond to an emotional reaction and judge someone. And you can look at that and say, oh, a judgment. And you can have compassion for the part of you that is still wired for judgment, and see how it's printed out in the results of that computer program and thinking as an attack on someone else or an attack on yourself. And you can watch that and say, oh, I have compassion for that part of my experience. It's not me, but I have compassion for it. And you can own it. Again, it's not about exercising it, or getting rid of it. You can own it and say, that's still a part of me. That's a part that's healing. And simply with that practice, it will start to change. Because without the ego identification, without the personal identification to the thinking, it starts to lose steam just naturally starts to lose steam, like the idea of, if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing. Just naturally starts to deflate and naturally starts to support where your awareness, your intention of mind is going, to states of grace, to breath, to ease, and to flow. And when that becomes the dominant narrative and intention, spontaneous thoughts will arise that support that, rather than spontaneous thoughts that support destruction and pain and fear. And there's nothing you really need to do about it. The idea that you need to do something about it, that you need to control it, is just another trap of the ego. And I succumb to that many a time in my practice, where if I was not liking something about myself, and really that was only coming from thinking, because the only way to dislike something about yourself is through thought. You can have emotion, but the judgment comes through thought. The body is not judging you. Body is just it's just communicating experience. It's the thought that's in judgment. So if I was in judgment in my thinking, then I would attempt to wrestle my thinking and control it, produce something else, produce a vision of my life as I want to see it, the art of manifestation, as we call it sometimes. And, there are some who speak to that. And I love people like Joe Dispenza, and there's like Tony Robbins, very powerful figures who are like, we can change our personal reality. And we can, but it's slippery. You don't do it through thinking, but we're so used to doing with thinking. So it takes practice to see that the doing actually comes from a much gentler process of surrender. And in order to surrender, we need to surrender the thought. And that's when a different source becomes more viable. You can call it intuitive wisdom, which is really a connection to spirit, a connection to this light source energy. And it can come in the form of guidance, of spirit guides. It can come in the form of just knowing. You might call it gut, heart knowing. Visions may come to you. Feelings, very strong feelings, things you may have written off in the past because you worshipped the holy grail of thinking. But once you stop, you recognize these other sources are actually holding more value. What have always appeared to be the gaps between the notes become the music itself, becomes the most valuable piece. And the notes, the thing that's the thoughts that are going on, they actually become very secondary. They take a complete They completely back off. A back seat is what I was looking for. They take a complete back seat to sort of the driving of the car. Thinking becomes way back. And what is being led is more of the surrender to this life source energy, this recognition that you have awareness, but you're not necessarily controlling things or making things happen. You're mostly just witnessing. You're mostly just witnessing it all unfold. And it gets dicey or scary at times because of the fear conditioning and wiring. You get into places like, well, I haven't done anything today. What am I supposed to do for my spiritual path and my healing? Do I need to visit a healer? Do I need to go for a run? Do I need to? And one or all of those things may be helpful. But that whole process just happened in your thinking. Do I need to? Do I need to? Should I? All that is thinking, and it's actually not necessary. If you practice unhooking and allowing the sensation of whatever it is, the tension of the feeling of the need to do something, to express the body in some way, to go somewhere, it may naturally just start to happen on its own. You may be in the car driving and be like, how did I do that? That seems more like a dissociative example. You can do it consciously. But you may find yourself on a walk and wonder, how did I get on this walk? Things may just start to unfold. And your job, so to speak, is just to become present, just to be present with it. Because if we seem to just snap back into reality, it's likely that we were carried away in thought or fantasy, and that's okay too. It's all part of the process. But more notably, you might sense that you're beginning to let go of control, which can be deeply scary. And that's where I'm at in a lot of ways. I've let go of a lot of elements of control that I appeared to have or that I attempted to have and to hold tightly to. My life was not going very well, though. So it wasn't a very evidence-based practice. But it was the only one that I knew. It's the only one that most of us know. So to hold tightly, and the way we hold tightly is with thinking. Many of us are so intellectualized and heady, so to speak. So we attempt to plan out every detail and think through everything, the future of what could happen and what should happen and what will likely happen and what we don't want to happen and what has happened that we didn't like. All of that. It's such a waste of energy in that gas guzzling car. A lot of it is produced from fear. And so if there's fear, we can be with the fear and move through it and recognize the fear itself, however it's showing up in the body and maybe producing thought, but it's that mechanism itself that is causing the distress. It doesn't need to be solved through thinking. All healing happens in the present. You can only ever act in the present. You can do things that will impact your future, but and you can practice in visualization and in meditation, seeing your future unfold, but it's much more of a dance than a force, than forcing your vision to happen in exactly the way you want it to. And then when it doesn't, you get upset and you go into more thinking and more strategizing and planning. Maybe in some professions, that's what's needed, but in the journey of life, it's really not. It's just like that reading. You think you need to be reading things out loud in your head. But that's not actually how things unfold. That's one of the greatest illusions. You're not making the learning happen that way. You're not making your life happen that way. It's happening on its own accord. The ego is just taking credit for it with thinking. Look at all you did with your thinking, your beautiful thinking. No, that was just sort of an add-on. Once you start to notice that it's happening on its own accord and that there are things that take practice, you're going to give a speech or perform or do a sport or train in some way. You practice, but the practice happens in the present. Even the visualization happens in the present. which is strange to think about or to say out loud because you're visualizing. But what you're doing in visualization is you're teaching the brain an experience now. The brain can't tell the difference really between future and present. So if you're thinking in the future and thinking of something stressful, the brain is stressed now. The body is in stress now. So you're never taking the body with you into the future. Through the beauty of visualization is that you can, and this is what Dispenza speaks to, you can visualize what's happening or what you would like to see happen or what feels most aligned to happen. And the brain and the body, it experiences it presently. That's the power of it. So worry has no part of the equation. Worry is just still a part of that conditioning that is thinking you have control in that way, in a different way. Thinking you have control over the events that are going to play out and that you need to take control rather than just seeing it in your mind's eye, or tuning into your heart and feeling the way you'd like to feel in that competition or that speech. And then you can say the words and rehearse what you want to say. But you can also just feel into it and see yourself experiencing it and it going well and you feeling satisfied. That's manifestation. That's visualization. It's not about, you don't have to know all the details. Because who knows exactly how it's going to play out? There's many factors, many people on this earth that all make decisions. It's not up to you, only you, nor does it have to be. Your job can simply be to align with the state of being that you want to be in, the peace, the bliss, the satisfaction, the ease. If you're attached to things having to be hard, which I often have been, so I don't say that dismissively, I have often been someone very attached to the idea that achievement comes with difficulty, because it often has been difficult for me. So that was a natural belief that became conditioned and really from some past life karmic inheritance that of many lives of suffering that I needed to continue suffering, of which I did, until I started to slowly realize that that wasn't a necessary part of the equation. There could be a softening and an ease and an allowance of things to unfold without nearly as much thinking. I may do another episode on intuition, which is cultivating a different source. The only thing I'll say now is thinking and ego can still get into that process. You may think you're being intuitive when really you're just thinking. And I've done that many times. I started to hear guides, I started to get answers from a different part of myself. But if there's fear, then there's thinking. If there's fear, then there's expectation. Then there's risk of disappointment. That's not the true state of openness and curiosity, which is really where intuitive wisdom flows, because we need to be in a state that allows the wisdom to unfold, to be brought to us. You're not chasing anything. I tried to turn intuition into a working hard game where I'll work on it. I'll really grow it like a muscle. And I've even said that before and written about that. You're not growing anything. You're just tuning into the frequency and you're getting more familiar with it. And you do that through allowance, with breath and present focused awareness and meditation. Though again, that's another word that can feel so hard for people. And me too. So it's learning how to enter a state of flow and allowance. That's where the wisdom comes. That's where the creativity flows, where the guidance reveals itself. So if you find yourself caught in thinking at whatever stage of this process you're at, or consider yourself to be at, continue to practice letting go, seeing that that's not a necessary part of the process. Things will unfold as they're meant to. Just bring awareness to its unfolding and sort of witness the miracle of the actions that begin to happen on their own accord. It's one of, if not the most beautiful part of this journey, is to see that you do not have to be the doer. You can create, but from a different source. Thinking never created anything. It just judged everything. Practice letting go of the judgment and experiencing everything simply as it is. Reading the pages of your book without having to narrate it out loud in your head all the damn time. Letting it wash over you. Like the mystery that it truly is. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.